companies don't have their data capabilities figured out, and yet they're jumping into AI. So they're trying to leapfrog their data journey, and it doesn't really work well that way. So I think that we are going to see the consequences of that. They're probably not going to hit the ROI that they expected. There's going to be some bumps along the road, and in the end, they're going to have to go back and figure out their data foundations.
Podcast, Christina. I have been admiring our tenacity to get this done, as I think we saw each other in person first before we actually got this scheduled after multiple times in different time zones and travel, because you travel quite frequently as the founder and CEO of Dare to Data. And so thank you so much for coming on the podcast and chatting with us today.
Of course. Thank you for having me, and thank you for being patient. And I'm really glad that we matched our schedules so we could do this.
Yes, it's going to be a great conversation. It was great to see you at Data Universe and all the rest of the data vendors. I love what you guys have going on there. It's such a, I don't know, it's just such a fun way to be able to connect with people and learn from people. So is this something that's going to continue to grow, data vendors and seeing you at conferences? Where's that headed?
That's the idea. I mean, the idea is, like you said, we're making it fun, and we're bringing energy, which I think is something that typically lacks in these data and tech conferences. So if that's what we're doing, if that's what it seems like we're doing, we're getting that across, then perfect. That's the mission. We want to bring that energy, make it fun, and also tell stories about what's happening in the field and with the different solutions, products on the market. And you can definitely expect more of us at conferences.
Awesome. Well, I'm happy to know that, because it means I always have a friend at any conference that I go to, and I think a lot of people feel that way too because they see yourself and all the data vendors on LinkedIn, and so it's like once they get to meet you and see you in person, it's like, oh, I already know this person and have a friend, which I think just makes that experience so much better.
Yeah, it's true. And also it's very nice when you go to these conferences and meet people for the first time in person. Because that was our case. We have known each other for I don't know how long now, but through LinkedIn, and Data Universe was the first chance we got to meet in person.
Yes. So previously to being the founder and CEO of Dare to Data, you were the analytics lead at Google and Waze. And I know you are consulting for many different organizations, educating, advising them, helping them co create. I'm really interested to get your perspective on where you think most organizations currently stand in their data journey. It's something, we all talk a lot about at conferences about data culture, data journey, but just given your vast experience and more importantly, kind of broad view of the organizations that you work with, where would you rate most organizations on their data journey today?
This is a good question to kick it off with, I think. I always like to think of the data journey in terms of the analytics ascendancy model. You're probably familiar with that. It was first, I think, proposed by Gartner, but that analytics ascendancy model, in general, it classified everything into you're moving from hindsight to insight to foresight. But then it pushed them out into four buckets, which was descriptive analytics, diagnostic analytics, predictive, and then prescriptive. And then on top of that, I would add the fifth one that many people are talking about now, which is cognitive analytics. And that would include all of the new age AI applications that we're seeing. I'm giving you this context because I think most companies still don't have the BI phases figured out, to be honest. So that would be the descriptive analytics, diagnostic. Maybe they're doing a little bit of predictive, but I don't think they have a lot of these foundations figured out, and yet they're really eager to adopt AI, given all of the hype around it. They need to catch up. So I think that I would rate most companies here, whether they want to admit it or not, they still don't have everything with their BI data foundations figured out. And I think that in the end, a lot of them are like jumping into AI because they feel like they have to. And I think this is going to present like a common challenge roadblock. We're going to see the effects of it in the next year, next couple years, because companies don't have their data capabilities figured out, and yet they're jumping into AI. So they're trying to leapfrog their data journey, and it doesn't really work well that way. So I think that we are going to see the consequences of that. They're probably not going to hit the ROI that they expected. There's going to be some bumps along the road, and in the end they're going to have to go back and figure out their data foundations.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up this analytics framework because I still remember when I first became an analytics engineer and was part of a team who was doing a whole analytics transformation at a $5 billion company that had been around for 60 years, right? So, kind of the typical companies that a lot of us work for today. And when I saw this analytics framework, I was just like, oh, yes, like I get it 100% now. Like it all makes sense, the different stages that you have to go through, and made the same mistake that you discussed and a lot of organizations make, which was trying to skip the steps, right? Like we can just skip steps 2 and 3 and jump straight into AI. And then was unfortunately really, I don't know, surprised that, okay, we got to go back and go through the steps in order, which can seem frustrating and slow, but it's like, also, you can't ever cheat your way to where you want to be either, I think is a good reminder. Um, but more importantly, you can get a lot of value at each step along the way, right? So I don't think it's a matter of like, hey, we're starting at step 1 or we're starting at step 2. And it's great to have those aspirational steps, but just as you mentioned, you have to go through each one sequentially. When you mentioned that you can't skip steps, which I think is really important for organizations to know, but particularly now with the age of AI. But more importantly, how do you help coach organizations and leaders through these phases? I know you've come up with a really great framework called the ACE framework where you advise, create, and educate. But can you tell us a little bit more of like, how do you help people move along that analytics and AI journey?
Yeah, I have these ACE pillars that you mentioned, and it doesn't connect exactly back to the ascendancy model. I help them with different parts of their journey, but the ACE goes back to the letters actually stand for advise, create, and educate. So these are the services that I offer underneath Dare to Data. And what inspired that structure to begin with is just mainly because it maps back to my own strong points. It's how I see myself and my company having the most impact. So if we go back to them, advise would be for advising clients in their data journey, which is exactly what we're talking about now anyway, as well as advising individuals in their own data careers. And then the create piece would be for content creation. So typically working with data brands on media partnerships through content creation to amplify the reach of their products or their solutions. And then the last one, educate, is pretty self explanatory, but educating others on data and AI related topics, whether that be through trainings, through speeches, through higher education. So there's different services that I offer, and they all fall or roll up to those three pillars.
So, how do you advise organizations today who maybe are getting a lot of pressure from the C suite just in regards to the AI hype? And they are either a chief data officer or a director, and they've been working in, getting their data in order, having the data governance in place, creating the better data pipelines, and providing self-service analytics. But they're feeling all this pressure from kind of outside forces of, what are we doing with AI? Like, this is going to change the world. And they're like, no, we got to stick to the steps that we're already doing. What advice do you give to people in those situations who are maybe feeling outside pressure, but have a good game plan moving forward?
Well, first of all, don't skip the steps. We already covered that. Don't skip the steps. But I think it's actually quite interesting because if you go back maybe a few years ago, these leaders, chief data officers, or data managers, they were in a spot where they were having to like sell the data and push. For why this is so important. Why is this so important? And now it's almost like the tables turned because of the AI hype. And it's accelerated so much that instead of the data people going to the CEO is coming back, or the CFO, whoever it may be, is coming to the data team, and saying, what are we doing with this? We need to be on top of AI. What are we doing here? So it's definitely we've seen the tables turn, and data people are feeling the pressure. I think it's important not to skip the steps. I think it's important for them to evaluate the maturity or the journey that they're already on, and understand their current capabilities and what is to come. There's lots of different things that I talk about. It all comes back to really where they are in their own on their own journey. Are they newbies? Are they pretty fresh to this? Are they already working along their journey, doing it for years? And depending where they are in their journey as well, I always like to talk about value identification. Um, Trying to map out possibilities of where you could see data having an impact in the company. Where is it feasible? Do you have the data to make it happen? What's the expected value of this? And so definitely, I typically talk about value identification and helping with that as well. Very important with this is just in general awareness and sponsorship throughout the company. So making sure that people also have very clear what can AI do and what can AI not do, and what can we do and what can we not do at this time, so you can set expectations from the start. So hopefully that's giving you a little bit of idea of different things that I like to touch on.
Yeah, I love how you use this as an enabler, right? Whereas instead, before in like the early days of working in this space, you were trying to communicate to everyone the value, right? It was like, this is why we should do it, and this is why it's great. And now the tables have turned, which is so great, right? People are coming to us. And so it's that opportunity to help educate and provide that awareness in terms of capabilities and bring more people into the conversation, which I think is always what we want to have in a data team is more people in the conversation as well. What do you see as some of the common, pitfalls in moving along this journey? Do you ever see organizations getting stuck at one of the phases, right? Maybe they've done really well at like self-service analytics and reporting, but are really having trouble moving into that next kind of predictive phase. What's the main barrier for organizations to move from phase 1 to 2, 2 to 3, etc.?
It's a really good question, actually, and I'm trying to give it some thought. Big barriers. I don't know. I mean, when you ask me about challenges and barriers, the first thing that comes to mind for me is just the risk associated. I don't know why this is the first thing that pops to my mind, but I talk about it a lot in my talks, in my trainings. I get asked about it too. Because as you move along in that journey and as you depend on data more and more, as you lean into it more to drive your decisions, you're giving more power to the machine. You still keep power, you should as a human, but you're leaning into it more to guide you. You're also opening up the world to risk. So, one of the things I get asked about a lot is the risk or even the regulation, which could be two things. Like you have the risk, which might be the machine is wrong, the predictions are wrong, the output is unethical, or you have the other side, which is regulation. Like, is what we are doing correct? Are we following the regulations that we should? Which gets very strict. Particularly, I'm based in Spain, so in Europe, it's the strictest area for data use, data privacy. Other countries are following along as well and have their own regulations. So I think once you move along this journey, one of the things that sticks in the mind is the risks. How are we going to deal with this? And how can we make sure that we don't have a big hiccup, that we don't mess this up?
I think there's a big difference from what I would call like deep tech versus broad tech, which is, deep tech organizations would be like companies like Google, right? There, everybody thinks of them as like tech first, Tesla, Netflix, Meta, etc. But then there's a lot of companies who I think of as like more broad tech. Maybe they've been existing for a long time, but in some shape or form, all of us are technology companies too, because we have to have this to provide our products and services. But when you enter industries like finance and healthcare, these are heavy regulated industries. And before I thought, early out of my career, I'm like, I think they just move slow because they're old. And then later on, I go to realize that no, they move slow because there's a lot of regulation and a lot of risk associated with that as well. And I think that you called out such an important thing for leaders to be aware of is moving on to that next phase is this being able to assess that risk and understand that regulation properly to move forward into it. So who does that typically fall under in an organization? Is this something that falls under kind of the CDO office and who needs to assess and evaluate this risk and regulation? Or is it something that falls within cybersecurity and legal? Where does that typically lie and whose responsibility is that?
I think it's very much cross-functional, and it depends on the type of risk. You mentioned cybersecurity, so you could be pulling in a completely different team, cybersecurity, but you can actually use AI to combat with cyber attacks. So that would maybe be a combination of a cyber and IT team with the data team. Regulation, you're going to need to involve the legal team, depending what it is. So I think it's very much cross-functional, and I think now that data and AI have made it to the boardroom, they are top of the priority list. The risks that come with that should also be addressed alongside it, and they should be addressed alongside the different organizations. Everybody that touches on that risk of that product should be involved in the decisions to make sure that they're avoiding the risks or minimizing at least the risks.
Yes, I know we all would love to avoid risk. I would love to avoid all risk in my life, like, but unfortunately that's not the case. But as long as we can minimize the risk as much as possible, I think we're in really great shape. In regards to, we talked a little bit about, some of the common barriers or pitfalls in moving to that next phase in your analytics journey. If you could give organizations one piece of advice to continue to progress through their analytics journey, what would that be?
I don't know why the first thing that comes to mind is Just Keep Swimming by Nemo. That's the first thing. Dory and Nemo, Just Keep Swimming is my first thing. Um, as well, I'm trying to think of something more serious than Nemo. There is this one quote. There's this one quote that I love to use when I'm doing trainings and talks. Let's see if I can remember it exactly off the top of my mind, but it's by Pedro Domingos. He's a Portuguese professor and author, and he wrote this book years ago called The Master Algorithm. And there's this phrase that he said in it. He said that it's not man versus machine; it's man with machine versus man without. Data and intuition are like horse and rider, and you don't try to outrun a horse, you ride it. So this is like the piece of inspiration that I usually always give to people when I'm doing any sort of training or advising. That first of all, don't be afraid of this, and do not jump into those thoughts of this automating and taking your job. So don't go something like that extreme, but just don't be afraid of the technology in general, and take a step back and understand how it can empower you and your team on the job. So going into it, the piece of advice here is going into it with a positive mindset and understanding how this can empower you and your team. How it can, don't look at it as a burden. How can it be here to solve problems for you? And as you're going along that journey, consider how each step is going to benefit you and your team and your organization.
I love that quote. I am definitely going to add that into a few of my talks as well. It's so much better, I think, than it's so more elegantly put than what everyone is saying today, which is like AI is not going to take your job, but somebody using AI will, right? And I'm like, that one still is like a little fear mongering. Where I love, people who speak the romantic languages always have a much better way of putting things than us who kind of just brutally put it here in English of like, you better use AI, otherwise somebody using it will take your job. So definitely we'll use that quote. And then you can't ever beat a Disney quote, which is just keep swimming. So as you look ahead in terms of where organizations are headed, you mentioned how AI can help with cybersecurity. Do you also think that AI can potentially help us along our analytics journey, right? So we have companies out there who are saying, dashboards are dead. Just start to ask questions. We have tools like in the GPT store that can help to analyze some of your spreadsheets. Do you see this as an opportunity where organizations with the power of AI can also turbocharge their analytics journey, or how do you see that fitting into the future of our analytics journey?
Yeah, first of all, at my talk at Data Universe, one of my slides actually said dashboards are not dead. So I have heard people saying this, and I do not agree with it. I don't think dashboards and reports are dead thanks to this age of AI. I think we're still going to need them. AI can definitely help us a lot more now, where we can interact directly with the data, asking the machine, asking the data for insights directly, but the machine still lacks a lot of the business understanding that we need. And we're also pretty bad at knowing what we want or what we need. So you need to know what you want or need, and you have to tell it exactly to the AI. It's not going to be able to just predict that for you. So AI can definitely help, but it's not going to replace anything of the basic analytics. You were asking how it can help along the journey. I think definitely we're seeing a rise in the co-pilot tools, so it can help teams that are working on the code, whether that be SQL or Python, but it can help you develop code much faster, and as well as debug it, understand what you're doing wrong. I think that's an area that we're going to see a lot of. I'm not, I've heard about this. I've heard about the rise of Gen BI, generative business intelligence. So I think we might see more of that, where we can actually communicate with the dashboards, and it can help us draw up insights or visualize data. But am still not convinced it's going to be automated completely. I think it will be like a combination that, yes, you can interact with the data, but you still need to do things on your own and use your own knowledge and creativity. So I think, yeah, I think it's going to be a part of the analytics journey, and it's going to speed things up. It won't replace anything, but it can definitely help us.
We've talked a lot about organizations' analytics journey, but I also find that we all in this space have our own analytics journey as well, right? And this is part of what I love about working in this space is that, you can get started as an analyst and move into so many different roles. I started as a research analyst, to analytics engineer, to data scientist, to lead data scientist, to AI strategist. It's an amazing career to work in data. I mean, I'm such a fan. I would love to hear more about what your journey in this space has been. Where did you start? Did you always envision yourself being a founder and CEO? What has that journey looked like for you?
My journey has definitely not been a typical one, but it was typical in the sense that I started a long time ago with a love for numbers, math, statistics, and I did a bachelor's degree. It was actually a very odd bachelor's degree. I started in engineering and civil engineering, but I didn't like it. So I changed to an interdisciplinary field. It was called Science, Technology, and Society, where I was studying the GRIN technologies: genetics, robotics, nanotechnology, informatics, and nanotechnology, and their impacts on society. And then I did a specialization in informatics, which was statistics. So I started with this love and concentrated on my love for statistics, and that transformed into a career in data science. But that was a natural path for me. It's not always so straightforward for a lot of people in this field. But the part of my journey that was very different was that I'm from the US, from North Carolina, but I developed pretty much all of my career abroad in Spain. So in a completely different country, different language, and everything. You asked about my journey becoming an entrepreneur and creating a company. So before creating Dare to Data, I was at Google. And I left Google at the end of 2022 with this idea that I wanted to do my own thing. I also timed it with an international move. So I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. Just flew through everything into the bucket at once. I had moved back to the US to live in New York City for a year, and then decided to come back to Spain. And with that move, decided it was also the time to leave Google and start my own thing. And for me, there was a couple of motivations, but I am the believer that loyalty is not rewarded anymore, unfortunately. And I had been at Google and Waze for over 5 years, so I thought it was past my time. I think that if you're in the corporate world, you should change jobs or companies every 2 to 3 years to maximize your opportunities. So I was well past my prime time. So I thought that it was a good time with the move to leave Google and then just start my own thing. Why did I try going off on my own? Because I wanted to make a lot of my side passions into my full time job. I was already trying out different things on the side that I enjoyed. So I wanted to see if I could transform all of these side passions into a full time job. And that's what I've been doing for almost the last year and a half, and I'm happy with it. So it hasn't been something that I've regretted yet.
That's incredible. What advice would you give to aspiring individuals in the data space? How do you make the most of your career? Beyond if you're in the corporate world, switching, every 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, I think that's just something to keep in the back of your mind, but I think it's good to switch. Besides that, I would say that everybody knows the typical hard skills that you're hearing about, like programming languages. SQL is necessary, Python is important. The foundations of statistics are very important. But outside of these typical hard skills that you hear about, a couple of things that I would recommend is, first of all, curiosity and continuous learning. So, this is necessary if you're going to keep up with everything that's going on. The field changes a lot. So, it's beneficial if you get into the habit of updating your knowledge regularly and get into that habit early on. Find things that interest you, because if it's fun and it interests you, then it won't be such a burden when you need to study and update your knowledge. And then the other thing as well that I always encourage others is communication skills. And this is learning how to speak in front of people, even if it's just a meeting room, a team of 10 people. Get good at that. Get good at communicating, and especially get good at communicating complex ideas to broad audiences. So learn how to be like a translator and translate complex topics into easy to understand terminology or business terminology so you can communicate with anyone. And particularly learn if you can be a person, a data or tech person that can effectively communicate with the business side, then you're setting yourself up for success, because I think that's the biggest gap that we have in organizations today.
Yes, completely agree. I think everyone is looking for those translators, the people who can go in between the business and the technology. And if you have that ability to translate, you have a superpower that you will always, I think, be guaranteed a space or a job within this field. So, fantastic advice. As we get close to wrapping up today, I one highly encourage. I know you talked about how important the soft skills are, but if people are looking to get some of the hard skills like SQL, you do teach a couple classes on SQL as well, right? Where can people go to find these classes?
Yes, I do actually have. I have two courses out with LinkedIn Learning on SQL. One of them, so the most recent one I launched, is called SQL for Non-Programmers. This is a hands-on course. It's about 3 hours long, but I have tried to make SQL, which is already a very accessible language, I've tried to make it as accessible and easy to understand as possible for non-programmers and non-data science professionals. Because I know there's more and more people now outside of the data field that are really interested in upskilling in data. So check out that course and also stay tuned, because there will be more courses from me in the future, whether on SQL or other topics as well, but I'm working on it.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to see what else is coming down the pipeline and continuing to listen and learn from you, Christina. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the Data Bites podcast. This has been fantastic. And I just want to say congratulations on all your success, your future success. And thank you so much for just taking the time to share with the community and educate the community. Appreciate all your contributions to the space.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me on. I love the conversation.
And to all of our listeners, a big thank you to you. Remember to stay curious and keep learning, and we'll catch you next time on the Data Bites podcast. Bye bye, everybody. If you are enjoying the conversations you are hearing today, we encourage you to continue to be a part of the conversation. and join a community of like-minded, extraordinary women. With our free community membership, you're stepping into a realm where learning, networking, and growth are at the heart and soul of what we do. Connect with Women in Data's global community and network with our chapters all for free. But why stop there? Upgrade your membership with a special offer for Data Bytes listeners by getting $20 off a pro membership, in which you'll receive access to over 300 classes, leadership training, and exclusive events. If you're interested in mentorship and networking, we've got you. From monthly thought leadership webinars to exclusive networking events and a diverse on-demand mentorship program, the connections you'll make here are boundless. Join us and be part of a vibrant network. Dive into our book clubs, growth groups, and industry-focused gatherings. Women in Data is not just a community. It's a movement, a place where innovators, changemakers, and leaders come together to shape the future. Visit womenindata.org to join or use the special discount code in the show notes. Together, let's drive change one data byte at a time.